Hey everybody, this is Peter Joseph, March 11th, 2015. We are rapidly approaching Zeitgeist Day weekend. Hope everyone is prepared. I will be leaving on Thursday for Berlin, and it should be a wonderful event. There are a few tickets left if anyone still wants to come out to that event in Europe, in Berlin, Germany. All that information is on zdayglobal.org. Plus, you can find the webcast information that's free, also on zdayglobal.org, which will link to a Ustream, I believe. And yeah, pretty much anything anyone needs to know about it can be found. The map, which is currently being updated, can be found there as well to find one in your local area. And there's still time, of course, to put on your own local event if you want to share a video or just engage a conversation. Anyone can go out and conduct a Z-Day event. And of course, it's encouraged to bring in that global unity that is the Zeitgeist movement. I will be giving a talk called Origins and Adaptations Part 3. I was going to do a talk called Where Do We Go From Here, focusing mainly on activism issues, but I became inspired actually with some other research I'm doing regarding the history of post-scarcity thought, and I thought this was applicable for that context of origins and adaptations. Originally, I wasn't going to make a part 3, but I am. It will be short, though, no more than 15-20 minutes. But I will also include, as will other speakers at the event, information about improving chapter structure, coherency, inspiration, all those important things. After 6 years of this, we definitely are in for some adjustments. It's important that this conversation be brought up. I think anybody that's been working in chapters or maybe has fallen out of chapters or felt uninspired, which is natural in a world of this nature, the work that we're doing is not most immediately rewarded, and you have to really take it upon yourself and your own volition and fortitude to push forward, because you're not going to receive any other external support, which is why internal support from the movement is so critical and why we need to remain together and not let divisive issues come up and create unnecessary tension and noise, which is unfortunately periodically the case as well, but that's for another conversation. So today I'm going to jump back into the remaining questions, and it'll be a short broadcast because I have to get back to work. Question 1. Hey, Peter, I agree with most of what you have to say about artificial scarcity, but I haven't come across anything published that addresses the issue of natural scarcity, as in the inherent trait of humans to reproduce and multiply faster than what can be sustained, even with abundance present. For example, I have 10 of a resource and there are 8 of us, 4 males, 4 females. We are living in abundance with that resource. Times are good. This causes 4 couples to partner up, each having a kid. Now there are 12 of us and still only 10 resources. Now there is scarcity. It seems to me no matter how well the system is designed, once all goods and resources are met, you'll be faced with the issue of reproduction, and this will create scarcity. Okay, I'm paraphrasing a lot of that. I actually answered this on my Facebook page in a lot more detail than I'm going to go through right now, but I think it's a great question and one that's come up periodically and probably should actually make it to an FAQ somewhere on the global site. Here is the difference. Today we live in an ephemeralized production capacity, what Jeremy Rifkin calls the zero marginal cost approach, if you will, where we are continually doing more and more and more with less and less and less. And what this essentially means is that the carrying capacity of the Earth is not fixed. The carrying capacity of the Earth is actually quite variable, and the more efficient we become, the more human beings we can harness. It doesn't go to infinity, by the way. I'm just saying that the illusion of scarcity, going all the way back to Thomas Malthus, the illusion of carrying capacity overshoot, is just that. It's not taking into account the incredible and exponentially increasing efficiency protocols and processes that we have going. So ephemeralization will continue to create more with less, and this will work to expand the carrying capacity of the Earth, which makes your arithmetic assumption invalid. Once you look at these trends, and I hope you can, if you read the Zeitgeist Movement's materials, especially the book, The Zeitgeist Movement Defined, you'll see that it's not that simple. The second thing I would say on that has to do with material culture. And we've been living in a grand material society, material conspicuous consumption is what Thorstein Veblen called it, one of my favorite 20th century economists. And this value of driving around in Ferraris and Porsches and having huge mansions is really beginning to be frowned upon by general culture. It's not just because of the massive wealth imbalance that's an insult to all of us and a form of structural violence. It's also the fact that it's just rude. And we think about things like carbon footprint. We think about all these sustainability attributes that are coming into focus for the first time in human history, by the way. At no time in human history has the species been faced with true, large-scale, global ecological issues. And right now, we're on the edge of a whole slew of them. So the new ethic is changing. So the respect for people to be sustainable, looking at people in their status and an accomplishment in the sense of how sustainable they are, that's the new value system, and that's what's currently overriding modern conspicuous consumption material culture. So that's working for us now in the culture, even though it's working very slowly. And the final point I'll say about overpopulation, which is what your question more or less implies, is that in countries around the world that have overpopulation, they also have great poverty. And it's been extrapolated that I believe it's the 59 poorest nations of the world will basically double in their population over the next 30, 40 years, while the developed regions, the developed nations, will more or less remain unchanged. Now, that's counterintuitive to the way we think about, we look at the trend of the discovery of hydrocarbons, and instantly when we had all this new excess to excess energy to do more and more and more, you saw an incredible explosion of population. In fact, many theorists attribute a population explosion directly to oil, and I think that's probably absolutely accurate. But today it's a little bit different. If you give people more and you take them out of scarcity, there's a different value system orientation, there's a different level of education, in fact, and they don't actually just go out there and flagrantly reproduce. And this is what the statistics support, which means that the more you reduce scarcity, the more you give people what they need, the less they're going to reproduce. Number 2. Dear Peter, I'd like for you to clarify some of the things I've seen online regarding the Zeitgeist movement promoting pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, anti-vaccinations, anti-GMO, and anti-nuclear power. I was unable to find any such issues brought up in the Zeitgeist movement defined official TZM book, nor in any of the lectures I have seen. Could you please clarify what all this noise is about? Sure, it looks like you've stumbled upon some hate-filled websites or blogs or the like. This is nothing new. The first indictment of the Zeitgeist movement ever was that it was a conspiracy movement, which I don't even know what the hell that would mean. But this has been going on since the very, very beginning because these individuals had such a dissonant view of my very first film, which occurred years before the Zeitgeist movement was even started. They didn't really care what the Zeitgeist movement was about or promoted. They just hated myself and by extension projected that hate into anything that I did. Therefore, the Zeitgeist movement was condemned in such a way. Again, as you point out, there's nothing that talks about conspiracy anywhere. And I actually object to that concept because the notion of conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist is derived straight from this psychological warfare, McCarthy-era type of thing, where when someone talked about a non-capitalist system, or a little bit to the left as it would be, they were going to be labeled a communist, such as Martin Luther King had to sit in front of Congress or a special assembly and explain how he wasn't a communist during this era, which when you look back on it, you're like, wow, that is incredible. And I could see some type of ridiculous issue like that occurring even today, where someone, in an abstract notion, someone sits in front of a panel to explain how they're not a conspiracy theorist. This is the exact same rhetoric, and it's very base, and it's unfortunate how it works. I have a neighbor that met me, my neighbor, when I met him, he figured out who I was, and he said, oh yeah, well, I'm not really a conspiracy theorist, but I really appreciated your movie. And of course, I was taken back because of the clear and present establishment media brainwashing this individual had. You are basically fearful of the category of thought. It's a great way of thought control because you make people afraid of certain subjects, and they're so inhibited, and it's such a manipulation, I should say, of their social nature, of their need to be accepted by those around them, that if they walk against the grain that far and they go into conspiracy land, as though there's any such thing. You're talking about corruption. You're talking about group corruption. That's all you're talking about. But you enter that territory, you're ostracized as a lunatic who must believe that Elvis is still alive in Area 51, etc. So anyway, the conspiracy claim against the Zeitgeist movement is the last bastion of derisive attack that anyone can come up with that really hates the movement. It's right there above the communist attack as well, of course, which is uniquely coincidental. In fact, just to harp on one more thing, if you really think about the Zeitgeist movement, it is the ultimate anti-conspiracy movement in the sense that we look at things from a system perspective. Just because you talk about how a bunch of criminal elites might get together and perform some action for their self-interest, even if they think it's for the betterment of humanity, by the way, but they do it covertly and secretly, hence the definition of a criminal conspiracy, if it's illegal, that isn't us saying that they're to blame. We're saying that anyone that engages any type of behavior that's aberrant or caustic to society, or unsustainable, or whatever negative consequence, that is actually a system issue. It's because of what's incentivized and what's reinforced. So that's a good way to talk about it if people ever approach you in that way, is actually we don't blame people for really anything. We blame the system influence overall for incentivizing people into this tribal and competitive behavior. The next thing you brought up was pseudoscience. I know where this came from as far as recent attacks against myself and by extension the movement, and it has to do with the fact that I have a lot of inside information and have worked with a lot of people close to the cancer industry, and I have promoted things that in traditional scientific literature and peer review, on the surface, of course, you will see no valid evidence for. But when you take a truly critical view, a truly scientific view, which means you not only have to take into account your own flaws, your personal psychology, and your natural propensities to seek out what you already believe, you also have to realize the inherent social groupthink that evolves around any type of consensus making, which also has a biological attribute as well, not to mention the hideous cultural reinforcement fueled almost subconsciously by monetary interests and people's own status and survival. People constantly lie to themselves, and they constantly lie to others for their own self-interest subconsciously, because our social integrity is directly related to what we believe and how we are perceived by others. And in a monetary culture, once again, it's all about your status, it's all about getting money and everything else. It's very dangerous to confuse the scientific method with the institutions that claim to support it. Now, that's a very big statement. And it means that a new level of evaluation, actually what it really means is that we have to get rid of the fucking market system. Because in order to reduce the pollution that goes into the scientific process as we see it institutionalized, you have to get rid of everything that creates a vested interest. You really can't trust most everything that comes out of the scientific community when it comes to billion-dollar industries or anything with high commercial profiles. It doesn't mean good science isn't being done. It means there's too much power to repress it or to revert it or to bully or to use the pure consensus against really well-meaning people in the minority. So I'll put it this way. True scientific evaluation is not just the process of general scientific unfolding, the hypothesis, the testing, the replication. Then there's the system layer. It's the submission to peer review. Then there's the wide peer review consensus, which, even though there's no real benchmark for it, is supposed to be where we eventually decide what is true and what isn't. You have to take another larger view and look at the psychological and sociological pressures that may just influence the decision-making through fear of all of those people employed. And not to mention, there's a whole pop culture groupthink and bullying mentality, and you see these people everywhere. It's a subculture of people that literally take their time not to contribute to further progress, but to go into the internet sphere and simply attack anyone for their beliefs, which is very dark and horribly unproductive, by the way. They just feel it's an immaturity, bullying mentality. It's a psychological thing that people have and they develop, and they get this group identification and they run around arrogantly thinking they're smarter than everybody else, so they can insult and bash people, and they group stalk and all that pathetic shit. And it's too bad that that happens at all. There's an organization, for example, called the Skeptics Society, which I think is great overall. And I'm not putting down the Skeptics Society as a whole, but there's an element inside of it that I've seen that is of a grotesque arrogance and grotesque conceit, especially in its leadership as well. And they sit there and they get off on debunking. They literally have like a positive endorphin rush and feelings of superiority and place in the world by trashing people's beliefs. Even people that should know better, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, falls victim to this necessity, this group need to mock and to be derisive and to do things that really, if they really cared, if they truly were progressive, they would not. They would not engage in these types of behaviors because the goal is to get you on your side, get people on your side, not to make them feel stupid. And it's unfortunate that Neil deGrasse Tyson, which I love, still does this. Making fun of people's beliefs or shaming them for what they believe does nothing, except, of course, making people feel better about themselves who feel the need to bully others and shame them rather than try and communicate in an intelligent way. And it's not to say that those beliefs are right, by the way. It has to do with the approach. You see, true scientific skepticism isn't just skepticism, it's skepticism with vulnerability, which means that you're not only skeptical of new ideas, new scientific advents in medicine or the like, you're also vulnerable to the possibility of them being true. You see, psychologically, and by extension sociologically, we have this identification with what we think is plausible or not. It's built right into our perception and our everyday experiences, where we see something so phenomenal or so radically different from what our expectations could ever be, and we are that much more cynical, we are that much more skeptical, and that is actually an inhibiting factor. It's a bias that's been created because of the lack of plausibility. So anyway, plausible logic is the antithesis of scientific and system-based logic, and it's at the root of all great failures. The Semmelweis reflex, if you don't know what that is, please look it up. And rest assured that pretty much every great scientific revolution in any genre has started off being condemned as a pseudoscience. So keep individual, keep thinking, be critical, and make your own decisions. And make sure, of course, you're thorough and also thinking about the ulterior motives and vested interests that surround a lot of the scientific publications you see. You have to research the individuals, and you have to do a lot of digging to get to the bottom of it. Now, to finish your question, I'm not going to go through every one of these because you're asking me personal questions, basically, that doesn't have anything to do with the movement. The only thing that has to do with the movement is the process of evaluation and keeping a wide view and keeping a healthy skepticism about the various factors that come into play when you're trying to decide what's actually going on in the world, whether it's homeopathy or vaccines or anti-GMO or anti-nuclear or anything else that you've stated that is contentious within the community or contentious within the scientific world. These are all issues that have to be evaluated the same way. And I have to admit, it bothers me greatly when you see the polarized behavior of people that claim that they are for science, but they polarize the argument where if someone says, well, I'm not too sure about what's happening in the GMO world or the vaccination world or the like, or anything that's to do with public health, especially in the wake of the epidemic rise in autism and the huge number of autoimmune and allergy diseases and all these things that are currently happening to many across culture, not to mention the huge spectrum of environmental issues that remain a mystery that are out there. And then you couple in a medical establishment and even a scientific establishment that has a long history of fraud and corruption and manipulation. And you begin to understand why people are so on the fence, why they're not willing to accept the orthodox output of the so-called scientific community and consensus. Now, I'm not saying that any of this is right. I'm not saying this is the way anyone goes about their decision-making per se. I'm saying I understand it. I understand it greatly, and I see all angles for it. And I personally don't pick sides. I would like to see more research done with vaccines. Does that mean I deny it? Does that mean I would never do it? Absolutely not. I would like to see more research into what GMOs have done, specifically when it comes to the acts of Monsanto with powerful government ties and huge funding resources to manipulate public and scientific consensus. I want to see more independent stuff happen. I don't buy it because I'm a true skeptic. So be critical, realize your own propensity to detract from the implausible, realize your own propensity to gravitate towards groupthink and what the majority thinks for your own identification and lack of ostracism. Realize that there are vested and ulterior interests on every single side. When you see what the majority consensus seems to be, always put equal gravity on the minority in critical thought, and then take in this entire equation to see what the truth should be probabilistically. And as a final note, for those out there that haven't investigated system-based critical thought, inductive, deductive, plausible. Please grab a book on that. You can't look at any process of science as we see it in society without taking into account all relevant factors. Anyway, I'm tired of talking about that shit because really it's so secondary. I mean, we're with the Zeitgeist movement. We're here to bring people together for the larger order system change, and it's really troubling that this noise persists and it really just distracts. I can't believe I just spent so much time on that, frankly. Okay, number 3. I have watched quite a bit on peak oil. And what are your thoughts on peak oil? It seems like all the experts say nothing will be scalable and it's too late, whether we have a monetary-based system or not. Well, that's interesting. A lot of changes have happened in the peak oil community since this new shale and unconventional oil process with tar sands and the like have come forward, which doesn't debunk peak oil, by the way, because peak oil was based on the original theory of the pools, the large pools of oil that's created naturally. Back in the day, you could dig down and hit a swimming pool full of oil, and you could pull that stuff up really easily with a huge net energy return. Today, it's very, very different, and most people that promote peak oil these days acknowledge that, as everyone should, that peak oil has been real. The United States peaked in the 70s as far as conventional oil, which is what it's about. But this new unconventional process, which has sadly absorbed all of the great technology that should have gone to solar and wind and geothermal and mixed-use systems, what should have been the revolution in renewables, has instead gone to fund all of these new unconventionals to keep the current establishment going. And that's very unfortunate. So, with respect to the experts saying there's not enough and it's too scalable, I don't buy that at all. I've never been into the post-apocalyptic oil thing in the sense that there's no other options, that renewables cannot work. I don't know why anyone keeps talking about that, because the evidence is so overwhelming, and all it takes is a little common sense to do your own math on the issue, and you realize that it's absolutely scalable through mixed-use systems, by the way. There's no one single silver bullet, which is different from the oil economy, but through mixed-use systems, you have incredible abundance, not to mention redesigned structures. It's all in the book. It's not just taking the current infrastructure, say, of a home and throwing a solar array on top of it and assuming everything's the same. No, you completely re-engineer the entire home as well and to incorporate as many other levels of renewable as you can, such as piezoelectric floors and a lot of other things like that. Number 4, which is a continuation, will there be a media day? I guess they mean a media festival later in the year. Well, there might be. I'm not sure if we're going to do one in Los Angeles. It's a very difficult thing for us to do these main events. We did a scaled down version last time because we don't make any money off of them naturally, and they're very expensive. But people do them locally. That's the thing we try to kick off. Just like people do Z-Day, we try to do 2 events a year. Z-Day is the serious one, and the Media Festival is the more fun communal one to try and keep some social capital going, So let's hope there's one in your area. I'm not sure if we'll do one in Los Angeles. That's later to be decided. I'm personally so busy, and I'm the one that ends up underwriting all of this, that I don't know if I can even afford it or if I'm going to have the time to do it. But that doesn't mean that the LA chapter, for example, where the main event has been, won't do it on their own. Number 5, how can one discern good science from the influenced or corrupted science? How does a TZM activist cope with this when advocating scientific and technological possibilities for a better world? Well, I think I addressed a good amount of that in my rambling answer moments ago, where you have to take a broader view. Now, we are not a science club. We take the big picture view about system changes, which we have an enormous amount of sociological and technical evidence to support, to show that, yes, we have a carcinogenic social system. Excuse me, I can't talk anymore. A carcinogenic social system which is messing up people's values, proven by public health researchers, corroborated for decades, coupled with a completely unsustainable approach to economy, now really coming to the forefront, even in common circles, once again corroborated by tremendous evidence and even mass appeal, even though the subject itself is social transition is very taboo because no one really understands what the answer is, but they are learning about the problem. So, discerning good science means you have to take a very critical perspective on any given issue, as I said before. Please go back and listen to that. You also mentioned in your question about an appendix that didn't quite make it online called the scientific method. And yes, I agree that would be a good place to put these attributes of critical thought. I mean, really, what I would do is merge your basic scientific hypothesis method, as is seen traditionally in colleges and high schools, with critical thought, inductive and deductive, and plausible reasoning issues that are often forgotten, not to mention ulterior motives and this sort of double think and naivety that is consistent throughout the general population, where they just readily accept what they see on the news that has come out of peer review when there are thousands of peer review journals. Again, anyone who just says, oh, but I saw this in peer review, it must be true, doesn't understand what the method of science really requires at this stage. Question number 6, which is a sub-question. When doing activism, one can not always remain on the abstract train of thought tangent. To create some basis towards people showing the findings of science and technology possibilities are much more concrete. However, how can one differentiate these application set examples between the ones that have a valid reasoning and those that don't? I don't know what you mean. I'm sorry, but I will assume what you mean. There's a spectrum of application set points. Now, if you don't know what the term application set means, it's in the Zeitgeist Movement Defined book. It's different from the train of thought. The train of thought is empirical. The application set is the current state of technology that we utilize at any given time, which will always be transient as technology evolves. Now, I'd say there are two extremes of the application set, one theoretical and one literal, one that's actually in use, that's, again, tangible. And that tangible is what you promote the most. Now, you can get into the theoretical. You can talk about nanotechnology. And there's a lot of good things to say about that. People in the Kurzweil world like to talk about this. And singularity. A lot of possibilities needs to be talked about and anticipated, and work needs to go into it. But when you really want to get people to feel it, you got to just stay with what's tangible and real. Forget living forever or artificial intelligence in some high extreme or nanobots or all of that stuff. Forget materializing abundance. You don't need to talk about that. You're going to lose them because they're going to think you're too fantasy-oriented. This is one of my great grievances with the Venus Project, is it delves far too into things that actually are still very, very experimental, and we don't need that. Everything that's available right now can accomplish what we need to do for a natural law resource-based economy. So stick with that. And you'll notice also in the book that it only utilizes tangible technologies. There's no whimsical foreshadowed technology anywhere in that book unless it's brought up just for the sake of conversation. All the statistical abundance creation methods presented that prove that we can have a global abundance are done through existing tangible working means that are already in play. 1 minute left. Final question, number 7. What are the specifics of natural resource management? How does the current state of technology work? The word censor has been used a lot. Are there any books or sites you could point me to regarding this piece of technology? I'm curious how automation will work in this scenario as well. Very simple. The Internet of Things has come out of nowhere as a big network sensor organization through the internet. Probably the best person to hear talk about this is Jeremy Rifkin, who wrote the Zero Marginal Cost Society. Very, very similar to what we're talking about, with a lot of exceptions, unfortunately. But this stuff has been talked about also at length in the book. So the Zeitgeist Movement Defined book, you can see and read about all of that. But if you want to read about the Internet of Things on your own time without reading a whole book, which is, again, free, please punch up the IoT. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great Z-Day, and I'll talk to you all soon.